Well, folks, I'm with David Carruthers at the Carnegie building, and David's advised me today of a pretty exciting success when it comes to funding. And so we thought the best way to do this was to go through, and David, thanks so much for coming down and taking the time to talk to me. You're our leading man on the museums in Westland and have been involved in this project. In fact, probably dreamt up this project, and we're now at a stage where it's actually going to happen. What's so special about the Carnegie building?
Well, I think, Bruce, everyone who's connected with Westland knows that the Carnegie building, it was built in the early 20th century, about 1907, I think, as a consequence of a grant from Andrew Carnegie for a library here, and he gave money to a number of similar buildings around New Zealand at the time. He was a very generous man from America. His name's well known in philanthropy. So we have the Carnegie building, which is behind me, one of the probably most historically iconic buildings on the West Coast. Most people know the Carnegie building in Hokitika. So when the Canterbury earthquake struck some years ago, and we all became concerned about the seismic performance of buildings like the Carnegie and other historic buildings, this building was, of course, under the microscope, and we've been, as a council, very concerned to make sure that we do all we possibly can to not only preserve the building, but to make it fit for purpose, and in fact turn it into a more successful and useful amenity in the local, in this locality.
David, in 1996, the community, we were going to pull this building down,
Yes.
And the community rallied with nearly $1 million and did the building up. But then, of course, the rules changed, and you've got a lot more experience in relation to earthquake strength than I have. How do we have it right and then not have it right?
Yes, sadly, I've got more experience in seismically suspect buildings than I really want to talk about. But well, all of a sudden, as a consequence of the Canterbury earthquakes, we realised that unreinforced masonry buildings were just dangerous, and of course this building was built in the early period of building construction here, so when the building was substantially refurbished in 1996, which was a fantastic project, people simply didn't perceive that they needed to be dealing with those sort of seismic issues. Had they done so, our task now would be a lot simpler, possibly. But as we know, time goes on, knowledge goes on, and so we now know today that we've got to be looking at this building entirely differently.
So what strength will the building be when your plans are all finished? What will the strength be?
At the moment, it's, I understand, 34% of NBS, or New Building Standard, which is really the minimum a functioning building like this can be at. But at the end of the proposed work, it's going to be 100% of IL2, and which means that it's going to be right up there. It's going to be almost, it will be as good as if it were a brand new building.
Wow.
And so that's fantastic, and there aren't many buildings on the West Coast, frankly, that are at IL2, and that level generally, and so that's fantastic that one of our most important buildings is going to be at that really high level.
David, when the 2016 October, you joined council in October, the month before, we got up one morning and there were gates right round this building, and how did you feel at that stage?
I wasn't here at the time, but learned about it subsequently. It was a bit of a calamity for us, but you've got to understand that in those times everyone had become extremely sensitive about the implications of these masonry buildings that in the event of an earthquake they could collapse, not only injuring people in them but people out on the road, the footpath and so on. So we had a couple of engineering reports which worried us or worried people in the council, and as a consequence there was perhaps something of a knee-jerk reaction to cordon the building off and to prohibit any kind of human entry into it at all.
So at that point, David, you were placed in charge of the museum portfolio. Did it feel like a hospital pass at the time?
Well, yes and no. I think that by then, all around New Zealand, steps were being taken to renovate and restore these kinds of earthquake-prone buildings, and it struck me that we were being presented with an ideal opportunity here in Hokitika to restore the building. So in many ways, although we've had a difficult few years with the museum and the building, knowing what to do with it, and we've been all around the garden path on it at times. It's really presented us with a fantastic opportunity to refurbish it, strengthen it, and turn it into a fantastic amenity here. So I'm looking at it positively rather than negatively. I think we've had an opportunity handed to us, and our district and our town is certainly going to be the better for it.
You've certainly always been heritage focused. Now tell me, you put your working group together. We all knew that you're probably going to spend $1 million plus just to strengthen the building. How did you do it? I mean, how have we got to this point where suddenly you're about to tell the people of Westland that it's in the bag?
Yeah. Well, a number of people have been involved in that process. People like Leah Singer and Ginger Olsen, one of our councillors and also a local builder, have been instrumental in assessing the building, assessing its structural condition and its structural integrity. As a consequence of that, engineers were instructed by them on behalf of council to assess the building, come up with design concept and plans. We've been very fortunate to have someone such as Jackie Gurdon of Gurdon Consulting, who is a very heritage-focused woman with a business orientation and an ability to pull these sort of projects together. And Jackie has helped us immeasurably in making a case to both Development West Coast and also to the Lottery Board for funding to do the necessary work.
So to be fair to say that without her involvement, you and I wouldn't be sitting here, would we?
No, no. In the modern world, you've got to have people such as Jackie Gurdon, who possess the skills that I don't have and you probably don't have. So she has been crucial in just pulling all the strands together and making a convincing and compelling case to both lotteries and to Development West Coast to provide virtually, we hope, all of the funding required. So Development West Coast last year, I think it was, made a grant of $500,000 from its MDI funding program, and that really gave us the impetus to think, heck, we're nearly there with this amount of money in the bag. We can do this.
And David, you know, we've both been trustees on Development West Coast, and I often, when I sit back and look at my time and the time since it was put together, the MDI fund has added so much value to Buller, Grey and Westland.
It totally has, and the reality is on the West Coast we have a number of 3 very small local authorities with a small ratepayer base and very large infrastructure deficits, and we simply can't fund the projects internally. We simply can't do it, and therefore Development West Coast has provided invaluable financial assistance to Westland and the other district councils on the coast as well in recent years. And so we are incredibly grateful for DWC in relation to this particular project. If it wasn't for them, we would be having this conversation. The building, frankly, would be probably uninhabited now and would be probably being lined up to be demolished. We would have no choice. We simply can't, as a council, we can't afford to carry out the sort of investment that's required to be put into a building like this to save it. So DWC, thanks very much. We really appreciate what you've done for us and what you have done in the past, and hopefully what you'll continue to do.
So David, we've got half the money, or a little bit less than half the money. The ratepayers can't afford it. What was the process for going to Lotto? I've looked at some of the paperwork. Goodness me.
Yep, well that's what Jackie did for us, Jackie Burden. It's an involved and difficult and somewhat convoluted process, and I have in my hand now the letter from the Lottery Grants Board, which has just come to us advising us that that grant has been successful.
Fantastic.
It is fantastic.
Yeah.
And it's really the final piece in the puzzle that we've been looking for, waiting for, which will hopefully enable us to go ahead and do the work that's required to be done to the building. So, yep, it's a massive achievement for all involved, and something which we here and the people of Hokitika and Westland for years to come will be able to celebrate.
David, looking forward over the next couple of years, you can't take the museum or the heritage out of David Carruthers. So, what happens now? What are you looking at over the next 2 or 3 years for us?
Well, I think as people know, in recent times we've been thinking about, and the Provincial Growth Fund of this present government has enabled us to do so. We've been thinking about where the heritage museum sector might go on the coast and in Westland and in particular Hokitika. And because we were thinking about the redevelopment of the Carnegie building, we thought about the merits of some kind of combined project which dealt with a number of the historical issues that we have here. There's our museum here, the Carnegie building, the museum. There's the history of immigration into Hokitika in the early days of the gold mining industry. That's a story in itself. There, of course, back and beyond that, there's the story of the original inhabitants here. There's the Pounamu story, and so we wanted to be able to tell all of those stories in a cohesive fashion, and we developed the idea of a larger facility connected with a Carnegie that might do that. However, as I understand it, as I understand it, that's perhaps not going to happen in the way we envisaged, but no matter, local iwi, Ngāti Waewae, are developing other ways of telling the Pounamu story in conjunction with the other historical stories that we're endeavouring to tell here. I think that it's incredibly encouraging that all of a sudden the heritage sector, if we can call it that, is in the spotlight. It's our day in the sun. We're seeing developed Carnegie building and some of these other projects that are going to enable us to tell these stories here much more effectively in Hokitika.
And David, I've heard the comment made by Ngāti Waewae and Makawhio and Ngāi Tahu representatives that you can only tell the story where the story is. Yes. And Pounamu is Hokitika.
It is. it is, and it's what people know Hokitika for. We have the Arahua River just a little bit north of us, the great source of Pounamu. You have the Pounamu trails that snake all through this part of the world and north from here. So locally we are keen to tell those stories in conjunction and with the other stories that need to be told here about the history of this region. So it's fantastically exciting that everyone together is working towards the same end result here. And there's been incredible cooperation and collaboration between all of the interested parties, and that's probably the most exciting thing I think here, that we've been able to do that. As people might know, in last year local iwi gained seats around our council table, became part of our decision making process, because we've been as a council keen to develop a collaborative approach to what we do here. And so what we're talking about in the heritage sector is really an outworking of that spirit of collaboration that's really permeating everything that we're trying to do here as a council. So I think exciting times, and who knows where it will end up.
Well, David, what I can say is, having observed, and I haven't been part of it, apart from around the council table, I've watched you herd cats, as I say, with the people in the heritage sector, taken an impossible task with the Carnegie building. You've completely raised all of the funds we need, and I can't wait till the contract's let, and no doubt that'll come to council. Congratulations to you and your team, to Development West Coast, to Les Singer and Graham Olsen for their work, to Jackie Gurdon, to the heritage people who have had such a lot of input along with yourself. But you've led it. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Bruce. I don't think I take too much credit for that, to be honest, but happy to have been involved. It is a passion of mine here. We have so much of interest here and so many interesting and important stories to tell, and it's great that we can be part of that telling.
Well, folks, if I were you, I'd be following David Carruthers over the next 2 or 3 years, because by Joves, we've made some progress in the last 2, and we'll catch you later.